Howdy folks, it's me, Josh. The year is 1917, and the world is on fire. But as Europe had been brutally killing itself for the past few years, America, meanwhile, was sitting on the sidelines as a neutral nation. But after a series of key events, perceived acts of aggression by Germany would push the US to the breaking point, joining the war at a crucial moment for the Allies, managing to defeat the Germans. But what if that changed? What if, in an alternate timeline, America had remained neutral? But before I get into that, I want to make a very special announcement. The creation of the brand new Josh Patreon page. I've had people asking me for years if I had a Patreon or if there was any other way that they could support me. But now, finally, I've created my very own page where you can go to help support my content. There are 3 tiers ranging from $3 a month, $9 a month, and $25 a month for the truly generous, and each tier comes with its own perks, including access to an exclusive patrons-only Discord server, early access to videos, merch such as this nifty George Washington sticker, and even member shoutouts and exclusive content for the highest donors. And I want to give a very special thanks to Waldo Wares, who this past Tuesday became the very first patron. Thanks again, man. So if you want to directly support me and my channel, make sure to head on over to the brand new page, and I want to thank everyone who's kind enough to donate for their generous support. And now, back to the video. So first of all, why did America even want to join in on that bloodfest over in Europe? Well, to boil it down, trade. When the war first broke out, the American economy was in a recession. But then, when all of Europe went to war, many banks and arms manufacturers saw an opportunity to make big money. Because of the scale of the war, this meant that there was a very high demand for weapons, as well as loans in order to keep the belligerent nations' economies intact. And so, due to their already close ties and trade links, much of that trade was going to the Western powers of Britain and France. Some people, though, such as US Secretary of State William Jennings Bryan, thought that, actually, maybe we shouldn't be fueling the most destructive war in Western history. So he went to Woodrow Wilson, who wanted to keep America out of the war and try to find a peaceful solution, and said, hey, maybe we shouldn't be letting the banks give so many loans to the Entente. You know what? Yeah, let's stop those loans. Hey France, we're gonna stop letting the banks give you loans. No. Give us money. Okay. And so the US continued giving support to the Entente. But you know who didn't like that? Germany. Ever since the start of the war, Britain had placed a blockade on Germany, not letting any trade come in or out, including neutral American ships. So the Germans decided, you know what? Since America's neutral, we're gonna do the same thing to Britain. And so Germany enacted unrestricted submarine warfare, sinking British trade vessels. Now, though William Jennings Bryan was firmly neutral and didn't want to push back against the Germans on this, saying that the British blockade on Germany was just as bad, at this point, he had let most of the decision-making in the State Department go down to the bureaucracy, who began pushing back against German actions. Then, on May 7th, 1915, the Germans sunk the RMS Lusitania, containing a bunch of American passengers, and when Wilson sent notes of protest to Germany and refused to warn American citizens against boarding British ships at risk of being sunk, Bryan decided, you know what, screw this, I'm out of here, and resigned. Germany then halted unrestricted submarine warfare, not wanting to risk a war with the US, but in January of 1917, Germany decided that there was no other way that they could win and resumed it. And knowing that this would probably bring America into the war, they sought out a new ally, Mexico, sending the Zimmerman telegram promising that the Mexicans could take back the land that they had lost in the Mexican-American War if they went to war with America. The British intercepted the message, though, and sent it to Wilson, who decided that he was just done with German shenanigans, as Congress would then declare war on Germany on April 6, 1917. And though it would take a while for US support to arrive, they would end up showing up at a crucial moment, as Germany had already seen victory on the Eastern Front and was about to see the same on the West. But the arrival of American troops would prove pivotal, as the Germans would end up being defeated on November 11th, 1918. But what if that changed? What if, in an alternate timeline, America had stayed neutral in the First World War, as was the intent of the US government? So there are many, many ways in which this could be done. Either Wilson never acquiesces to business interests and keeps banks and such from giving loans to the Entente, Bryan maintains control of the State Department and keeps America firmly neutral, or Germany doesn't resume unrestricted warfare or send the Zimmermann telegram. Now, for the first two of those, that would result in a timeline in which America stays completely neutral, not sending nearly as much support to the Allies as they had in our timeline. But for the latter, that would result in a timeline in which America still supports the Allies, but merely never outright joins the war on their side. Now, of course, these two possibilities would result in drastically different outcomes for the First World War, and would shape the war in completely different ways from each other. But since I think it would be more interesting to look at what would happen if America had stayed completely neutral, we're going to look at that scenario. So, in this timeline, William Jennings Bryan maintains control over American foreign policy, particularly by keeping Wilson from acquiescing to business interests, for reasons you'll see in a minute. With this, the US wouldn't offer so much support to the Entente, as well as not protesting as much against German actions, which would also keep American public opinion from going as ballistically anti-German, though still generally favoring the Entente. So, as a result, America remains truly neutral. Now, without as much American material and economic support, this would put the Entente in a much worse position, likely not being able to hold down the front nearly as long as they had managed in our timeline. And so, within a couple years of the war's beginning, the Western Front would end up collapsing, with the Germans moving in and taking Paris, perhaps sometime around fall of 1916. And with the German victory on the Western Front, Germany then turns its attention over to the East. Since Russia wasn't nearly as reliant on American aid during the First World War, they would hold out pretty much just as well as they had in our timeline, as the Eastern Front actually holds out longer than the West in this timeline. However, as the Germans push onwards, the Russians do still end up collapsing, as the Tsarist regime of Russia is overthrown, with Nicholas II being forced to abdicate. However, with the war being pretty much doomed for Russia at this point, the new republic would end up suing for peace. And with the war ending earlier, the Bolshevik Revolution never takes place, with the Russian Republic surviving into the future. And so, with that, Germany ends up winning the war a few years earlier than the war ended in our timeline. Now, yeah, another Central Powers victory, so let me just... there. To keep this part brief, Germany takes some crap from France and Russia, as well as some colonies, and sets up some puppet states. Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire survive, and Germany ends up as the dominant power of Europe, yada yada. Cool. Now, back to America. Without America getting involved in World War I, we wouldn't see the same fatigue against progressivism that we had in our timeline, as progressivism remains the dominant force in American politics. And remember when I said that I would particularly have the US stay neutral by keeping Wilson from acquiescing to business interests? Well, the reason I did it that way is because this way, America never sees the economic boom of the 1920s at all, nor does the Great Depression ever happen. And so, without American banks exploiting the war for their own commercial gain, the economies of Europe never become dependent on American banks, as America never becomes the dominant economic force in the world as it had in our timeline. And so, Europe is still able to act independently of American interests and remain the dominant force in the world that it had been over the last century. And so, as a result, Germany likely becomes the single most powerful player on the world stage, as their economy dominates not just Europe, but the entire world. And so, as America remains as just a regional power staying in its lane on the American continent, the 20th century emerges as the German century. But how long German hegemony will last, only time will tell. If you can, please remember to check out my Patreon page. Any donation goes a long way to helping support me and my channel. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, make sure to stick around for more. And hey, you could also, maybe, subscribe or something. So that's it for today's video. Well, till next time, see ya.